Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our report concerns the problem of stress corrosion cracking. Stress corrosion cracking may be roughly divided into three stages: nucleation of steady propagating cracks, succeeding crack propagation, and formation of large crack resulting in final failure. In this presentation, we will talk about the second stage, environmentally assisted crack propagation. Usually, for modeling the second stage of stress corrosion cracking, large colonies of parallel cracks perpendicular to the applied tensile load are considered. The interaction between multiple cracks may significantly alter the stress concentration in the vicinity of crack tips. Depending on the configuration of the crack array, it can either increase or decrease stress intensity factors. Here we'll study the second effect. A shielding effect is due to the relaxation zone around the pre-existing crack flanks. This zone, which is also called inactive, is usually presented as a circle with the pre-existing crack as a diameter. To reduce the amount of computation, some authors assumed that in such regions, crack may not be able to propagate and coalesce with others. Shielding effect was studied by many authors for cracks of equal size and for two cracks of different sizes. We are focusing on studying the shielding effect caused by interaction of larger numbers of parallel cracks of unequal length with various relative distances between them and their centers located on the same vertical line. And we wanted to check whether the circular relaxation zone around the pre-existing crack may suppress the growth of other cracks inside it in any stack configuration. For example, we consider the model of crack propagation in 304 stainless steel used in the cited paper, where the crack growth rate depends on the mode 1 stress intensity factor. Like other authors, we neglect the change in the direction of crack propagation, considering their rectilinear growth. To find the length of cracks at any time, the forward Euler method is used. The time step size is chosen so that the relative difference in the results with the considered and the smallest step size was small enough. Static problem of multiple cracks at each time step is solved using the approximate method of Markachanov. This method becomes less accurate at relatively small spacings between cracks. However, all the results agree with each other. The method of Kachanov is applicable for the problem of a finite number of cracks. To approximately estimate the behavior of infinite periodic system of cracks, we developed a procedure of periodization, which also helps to reduce computational costs. First, we choose the number of periodic cells when the relative difference between the results with the less number of cells becomes less than 1%. However, it's clear that in any finite array, the stress state around the central cracks differs from the side ones, thus causing the difference in the crack's rate growth, since it's proportional to stress intensity factor. In order to eliminate the secondary effect of the difference in the length of the cracks in the central and other cells over time, we set the growth rate of all the cracks of the same initial size to be the same as that calculated for the central crack. Let's move on to the results. These figures show the relative length and the mode 1 stress intensity factors at the tips of the big cracks closest to the center in two configurations, with 3 cracks, one with 5 cracks, and in infinite configuration, the last one, after 150 hours of the crack's growth. The ratio of the initial big and small crack length is plotted along the x-axis, and different lines correspond to the different relative distances between the cracks. As can be seen from the figure, the length of the big cracks grows almost proportional to the initial length and slightly dependent on the distances between the cracks. The more the number of big cracks in the array, the less the final length is. The same is observed for the stress intensity factors. The most interesting thing, however, is that the dependencies of stress intensity factors for the central big cracks in the arrays consisting of 5 cracks and in periodic arrays turned out to be qualitatively different for relatively small distances between the cracks. Look at the 3 lowest lines. This graph was expected to be somewhat intermediate between the neighboring configurations, and it really is for large distances between the cracks, but not for relatively small distances. This surprising observation may be explained by the fact that the interaction between small and big cracks is suppressed by the interaction between only big cracks at small distances between them. This is confirmed on this slide, where the final relative mode 1 stress intensity factors are presented for the same configurations as above, but without small cracks. The central crack, lying between the two others, has the lowest stress intensity factor and thus grows slowly compared to its neighbors. And when its neighbors' lengths become relatively large, the stress intensity factors of the central crack becomes negative due to shielding effect from its neighbors. Coming back to the array of 5 cracks, we can see that the stress intensity factor of the central big crack becomes even less than that of the neighboring small cracks, despite the fact that its length is much greater. Next, we study the effect of the small cracks on the big ones. To separate this effect from the effect of the interaction of the big cracks with one another, we consider the length and the stress intensity factors of the big cracks in configurations containing both big and small cracks, normalized to the same values in the configurations containing only big cracks. Each such configuration has a minimum point. This minimum point is reached when the small cracks go beyond the relaxation zone. Nevertheless, small cracks lying inside the relaxation zone in the first configuration may decrease the mode 1 stress intensity factor of the big crack by more than 10%. Even in the case when the influence of small cracks on the mode 1 stress intensity factor is minimal, the mode 2 stress intensity factor can increase several times, where it's non-zero, due to the presence of small cracks. And this may cause mixed mode interaction with other neighbors. The effect of neighboring big cracks on small ones may be not unambiguous. As can be seen from the figure, for any big crack length from the considered range, there is a range of distances for which a small crack doesn't really grow with time. For configurations with 2 and 3 big cracks, these are cracks lying inside the relaxation zone. However, for the first configuration, the length of small cracks initially lying inside the relaxation zone can even double. The question also arises, how could some cracks in second and third configurations grow if the stress intensity factors do not exceed the threshold value of K1, shown here by the red crosses? This may be explained by the fact that at the initial stage, their stress intensity factors were greater than the threshold value K1 and they had time to grow up. But in the process of growth of the neighboring big cracks, they fell into their relaxation zone. We also considered large stacks of cracks. Here the mode 1 stress intensity factors of the central big cracks are compared for the stacks consisting of 23 big and small cracks and the infinite periodic arrays. As we can see, the stress state in the central part of the finite arrays stabilizes rather slowly, especially for relatively small distances between the cracks. Thus, we can conclude that introducing the relaxation zone of the same size for the cracks of the same length is not always reasonable. The size of the zone should depend on the threshold value K1 as well as on the relative distances from the considered crack tip to the amplifying and shielding neighbors. Thank you all for listening.